The year was 849, but for the young Cree woman travelling with her family band in the northeast regions now called Labrador, that number would have meant nothing. They had no such measure of years. No calendar marked the passage of one season into the next. These nomadic people followed their food sources season to season, wherever that led. The chief of the band had heard from a cousin of rich harvests of salmon to be had in the rivers of Labrador, so they struck north and east to the rising sun. Hawk River was the name given to the area the band raised their teepee village. It was on the banks of the wide river mouth near the sea. It was a fine protected area, given shelter from the sea winds by a big offshore island. The salmon were plentiful and were caught in great numbers with woven ash baskets, fixed traps, and when the run was great, with bare hands. The children had great sport in the shallows, scooping the big fish out with whoops and yells as they threw them flapping onto the banks for their mothers and older sisters. There was much work drying, scraping and preparing the fish. The skins were dried and scraped to make fine strong bags and pouches. The fine bones made needles for sewing, and the fish oil was used for remedies by the shaman and medicine woman. She sat outside her teepee making salves with the fish oil by boiling it to thicken it with carrageen moss gathered from the shore. The old shaman lay within on her robes, calling instruction. The young shaman called back, I know, you've told me 1,000 times, Auntie. Please rest and smoke a pipe. Bring it then, it's there by you, Leoti. For 3 weeks the band remained, getting fat on the glut of salmon. The peace was broken when bears arrived to share the harvest, and 2 had to be killed and the others driven off with lighted fire sticks. In the midst of this battle with the bears, there was another great excitement. 2 warriors raised the alarm when a giant canoe-like boat suddenly arrived in the bay. It had a large cloth on a great pole in its centre and many paddles down each side. The Cree band gathered to watch the thing draw close. They were nervous but not afraid. They'd met other tribes and bands, and usually a pipe was passed and peace was found. If war was needed, then it would be done if all else failed. Strangers were always given a chance to come and share the pipe before warriors took up their weapons for a war. As a great ship drew close to shore, the warriors became nervous, for these men were like none they'd ever seen. They wore hair on their faces and big furs. Their long hair was not tied, and above all it was not dark. They had hair of yellow and red and brown, and their skin, where it could be seen, was pale like the moon. They seemed to carry no bows or arrows, but had large knives and giant tomahawks of some strange stone that shone like no stone the Cree had ever seen. The great canoe came right onto the beach, and then all became confused and fearful. The yellow hairs jumped from their canoe, yelling, with their weapons raised. It was to be war, with no chance of pipes. The Cree warriors were shocked and had to run for their weapons, for they would not greet strangers with the provocation of weapons in hand. By the time they'd reached their weapons in the village, it was too late. The yellow hairs were among them, hacking and slashing, killing all they touched with their mighty magic knives that cleaved off arms and legs and took heads off bodies. They took little time to kill all the warriors, and then they began to slaughter the boys too. They left none alive, not even the babies still on their mothers' backs. Mothers and babies died as the great knives slashed babies and mother as one. In less than 15 minutes, the village grew quiet as the young women were gathered in a circle. The old mothers and aunts and the very young girls were taken out of the circle and killed, so only the girls between 13 and 20 were left alive. Leoti saw her shaman teacher killed as she lay on her robes. The terror was absolute as the girls waited their fate in stunned, uncomprehending silence. Right. We'll now move to the next chapter, which is set in the year 1885. Trooper MacDonald picked up the band's trail again and rode on as fast as possible. Once again he saw dust ahead and pushed faster, closing the gap all day. He rode off the trail and tried to avoid kicking up dust himself. The foothills of the Rocky were close now. The prairie was giving way to clumps of forest and small hills. There were many lakes and a few large rivers that needed careful fording. At one crossing he noted the Chippewan seemed to have lost another horse. Its body lay trapped beneath overhanging trees downstream from the place they had forded. He came upstream and found a safer crossing. He'd entered the forest, and now there were signs of human activity. Felled trees, trails, and cleared places. MacDonald came to a rise and stopped at the top to scan the ground ahead. He knelt on the ridge, telescope in hand, and looked at the broken forest and the clearing leading up the gentle slope of the far hill. He saw smoke again and felt a chill. On the far side of the wide valley, with the river at its centre, smoke rose from the clearing. He could see part of a large circular wigwam with cultivated land to the side and below, running down to the river. The approach was open and clear of trees. The three Chippewan were about to cross the river. They were about 900 yards away. MacDonald ran back to his pack horse and unbound the pack with his long Browning rifle. He knelt, dropped the monopod that gave support to the front of the heavy rifle, and took a few deep breaths, then sighted. He knew the range was silly, but he needed to distract the fugitives and warn the occupants of the lodge. He made a small adjustment for the wind and extreme range, and then fired. He saw the last of the three fall off his horse in the middle of the river. MacDonald reloaded and looked again. The other two had dismounted and were running for the trees to the left of the cultivated ground. They thought the fire had come from the lodge in front. MacDonald put the long gun back on the pack horse, tethered it, and then mounted Katie. He rode down the trail through the forest and headed for the stream. He rode fast with carbine in hand. As he reached the water, he shot the wounded man sitting screaming in the middle of the river. He heard shots and more screaming. MacDonald rode up the side of the strip of tall maize. He dismounted and pulled his horse to the ground. She lay down willingly as he knelt with one knee on her neck to keep her still. He raised his carbine and aimed at the Chippewan stood near the door, shooting his Henry rifle at MacDonald. The fire was wild and erratic. The trooper took a deep breath, stilled, and aimed centre body. His first shot bowled the Chippewan backwards. As he began to sit up again, MacDonald shot again, hitting him in the face. The trooper mounted his horse as she stood and rode fast up the hill. When he reached the cabin, he dismounted, left his carbine on the horse, and took out his pistol. All was silent. He approached the cabin door and peered in, keeping low. Then he went in. On the bed lay a Chippewan man. He groaned, and blood ran from a deep wound in his side. MacDonald went to him, and taking hold of his long hair, dragged him off the bed, then shot him twice in the heart. Beneath the man was a woman. She lay still, eyes wide and breathing heavily. She had a large hunting knife in her hand. MacDonald put his pistol away and raised both hands to her, showing he meant no harm. She sat up and stared hard at him for a few moments. He took off his hat and threw it on the table. Then he took the Chippewan by the heels and dragged him outside. As he'd taken off his hat, the woman had made a surprise sound that he took for a delayed reaction to the attack. What she was doing was seeing his bright ginger red hair and reacting to that. He laid the body beside the other, then cut 2 pine boughs and covered them with these. When he came back to the cabin, the woman was standing near the fire and was naked. She was washing with warm water from a large pot hanging there. He stepped back outside and began to fill his pipe. Once lit, he sat on the step, puffing, and waited. The woman called from inside. "Come in, Redcoat, and have some hot drink with your pipe." The woman had dressed again in a fresh buckskin dress. The one she'd been wearing was burning on the fire. It steamed and smelt like roasting meat as the blood soaked in it burned. He sat on a tripod stool with a buffalo fur seat. He sighed at the comfort. After days in the saddle, his backside was tender. "Coffee or tea at the English?" she asked. He grinned at her, astonished at being offered such a thing by an Indian woman. He thought she must be Métis or Cree. She was tall, and he'd noticed she was very curvy, not at all a typical shape for a native woman. Her hair was rich chestnut brown and her eyes dark. "Tea, thank you. Have you sugar? I've sugar in my—" "Oh, My pack horse is on the hill across the valley. Can you hold the tea and I'll go get her? He left and was back 15 minutes later, carrying a small sack containing lumps of brown cane sugar. He handed it to her and she peered at it, unsure what he wanted her to do with it. He took out a small lump and reached it towards her mouth. She shied, so he put it in his own mouth and, grinning, made a yum-yum sound. Then he offered her another lump. She stuck out her tongue and he set it on it. She waited with her tongue still out, and then, as the sugar began to melt, she took it in her mouth, giggled and laughed. Like stone honey. You want this in tea? Please, one lump. I am Aaron MacDonald, and you are? Her head snapped around as he spoke his name, and she swayed as if about to faint. I am Leoti. I dreamed of you, Aaron of the Redcoats. I dreamed you had fire for hair and that you would come to me and that your name would be Aaron. And the final little piece is from the current story, which follows Aaron and Leoti in modern times. This is chapter 11 and it's called Montana. Ted Standingstone sat on a chair outside his door, feet up on a stool, smoking his fourth Chesterfield of the morning. 3 bottles of beer lay empty under the chair and a fourth was in his hand. He raised the cold bottle and rolled it across his forehead, sighing as a chill eased his throbbing headache. It was a hot, dry day and little wind funnels rippled across the yard, kicking up mini tornadoes. The dog got up from the yard and came and curled up under Ted's chair. He carefully dropped a small stream of beer onto the dog's head. It sat up and began to eagerly lap at the stream of beer. Ted fed it half the bottle, grinning at the animal's glee. You like beer near as much as me, Mutt, don't ye? The dog sat looking hopefully as Ted drained the bottle. When he dropped it, the dog began licking and chasing it around the porch. He watched it until the clicking and clacking began to intrude on his sensitive ears. "'Tis enough, Mutt," he shouted. The dog skulked off to try to find cool in the barn. Ted saw a dust cloud on the path that corkscrewed up the hill to his place. A postal service van appeared in the yard. The driver walked over and handed a letter to Ted, saying, "'T'other letter for ye, New York this time. Anne again, spect?" "Yup, spect so." The mailman waited, hoping for more talk, but soon realised Ted really do talk at any time. Nor was he interested in the gossip the mailman carried and was always keen to spread. He turned away and waved over his shoulder. He quickened his step as he heard Ted's old dog come barking. He was driving out of the yard when the dog reached the van. He accelerated hard, spinning the wheels and sending a jet of dust at the yapping hound. He saw in his mirror the animal drop its head and begin to cough. He laughed. Ted stood carefully, groaning as he straightened. He walked slowly into the kitchen, a small cursing groan accompanying his every painful step. He stood by the dresser and looked at the letter, and tossed it in a wooden bowl with all the other unopened letters from his daughter Anne. Leoti. That's it. This is available in paperback, ebook for both Apple and Kindle. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, leave a review, which is always appreciated. Thank you.